Civil War. Alex Garland's brand new film for A24. It might not be what people were expecting, but it's a devastatingly powerful piece of work. In this video we're going to press into its deeper themes and symbolism, and what it has to say about the human condition. The film is a bleak road trip movie. A ragtag group of 4 journalists are making their way from New York to Washington DC to photograph and interview the president in the midst of a civil war. Our protagonist, Lee Smith, is a renowned war photographer. She shoots in colour with a digital camera. The cold, unflinching, immediate quality of her photos reflects something of her character. She has been hardened by years of frontline action. She says it as it is, and she shoots it as it is. Lee is idolised by Jessie, a 23-year-old up-and-coming photographer who manages to wriggle her way onto this expedition. Jessie shoots on black and white film, hand-developing her photos on the go. She keeps the bottle of developer stored against her skin. Apparently it's just right when it's at body temperature. So Jessie's photos are more organic and stylised. Whereas Lee captures the cold brutality of the events, Jessie memorialises them. And you could see this as a reflection of the naivety that we see in Jessie when we first encounter her. We're gonna enter spoiler territory. During an early fuel stop, she is profoundly distressed by the sight of 2 captive men hanging from a ceiling, their bodies bloodied and barely alive. The captor asks her for an opinion. What should he do with them? Shoot them? The mortified Jessie has no answer and finds herself unable to take a photograph. But Lee doesn't hesitate, even asking the captor to pose with the hanging bodies.
I didn't take a single photo. I didn't even remember I had cameras on me. Why didn't I just tell him not to shoot them?
They're probably gonna kill them anyway.
How do you know?
He doesn't know, but that's besides the point. Once you start asking yourself those questions, you can't stop. So we don't ask. We record so other people ask. Want to be a journalist? That's the job.
Lee's colleague Joel is the one driving, and at this point Lee's mentor Sammy pipes up from the back seat.
Hey, Lee.
What?
Back off.
What am I saying that's wrong?
I'm not saying it's wrong. She just shook up.
Sammy is a veteran reporter. He knows the brutal realities of war, but he wants to allow Jessie just a moment to dwell in the horror and tragedy. In this car we have 3 generations of journalists, and their dynamic almost reflects that of a family. They're on this road trip together, experiencing unspeakable horrors, and they each have to find ways of coping with what they witness. After several experiences on the front line, Jessie begins to adapt, and during a stop at a refugee camp, she asks Lee for some feedback on her photos. Lee explains that even for seasoned photographers, the strike rate for keepers is 30-1. In other words, for every 30 photos you take, 1 is usable. And as Jessie looks back through her shots, she happens upon one that works. An image of a soldier bleeding to death. Lee examines it and says, "That's a great photo, Jessie." But what makes for a great photo in this context? It seems to be a photo that encapsulates something of the horror of the war, the depths of the human suffering. And Alex Garland almost approaches directing the movie like a stills photographer. When he happens upon an especially striking shot, he puts it in slow motion and cuts the sound, allowing the audience to sit in the moment. A notable example is the car driving through a burning forest at night. Our 4 characters are fleeing from a hellish encounter with some extreme nationalists. In a moment of slow motion, the sparks stirred up by the car resemble fireflies, dimly illuminating the faces of our characters, locked in anguished screams. It's horrifying, and it's beautiful. And I guess that is the tension of the war photographer. It's a form of journalism, yes, but it's also a form of art. And the drive to capture the perfect shot in the midst of the carnage is intoxicating. We will soon see how it brings out the worst in our characters. During a conversation with Sammy, Lee laments the fact that her work doesn't seem to be having much of an impact. She's captured countless horrifying images of conflicts from around the world, hoping that they might provide some kind of warning, but now she finds herself in the midst of a civil war in her own country. She's losing her faith in journalism. Clothing plays an important role in the film. If you're a soldier, your uniform identifies which side you're on, And for the press, it is the label on their vehicle and their clothing which, for the most part, grants them passage through the war zone. When Lee first encounters Jessie after rescuing her from a bombing in New York City, Jessie is just wearing regular clothes. Lee urges her to get the proper gear, a fluorescent jacket, a helmet, and Kevlar. This is a job that requires armour, and Jessie was ill-equipped, exposed. Clothing has a rich symbolic meaning. We see it in the story of Adam and Eve in the opening pages of the Bible. When Adam and Eve eat the fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, they realise that they are naked, and they make fig leaf coverings for themselves. But these are inadequate, and so God clothes them with animal skins. So there is an obvious human need to cover our bodies for protection. And we have a desire to control the appearance of the covering because it is the mask that we project out into the world. It's part of how people see us. Our clothing is what we hide behind, but it goes deeper than clothing. We have a tendency to hide ourselves away from reality. During a scene in a clothing shop, incidentally, Joel is taken aback by the calm demeanour of the lady behind the counter.
Are you guys aware there's like a pretty huge civil war going on all across America?
Oh, sure, but we just try to stay out.
Stay out.
With what we see on the news, seems like it's for the best.
She's calm because men with guns are patrolling the nearby rooftops, and she has hidden herself away in the normality of her shop. Notice she alludes to the horrific things she's been seeing on the news, images captured by people like Lee and her team. And this is one way of responding to the horror, hunkering down, staying out of it. We learn that Lee's family has opted for this sort of approach as well. And it raises the question, if these people could help out in the conflict in a meaningful, life-giving way, would they? Or will they only continue to wrap themselves up and seek to preserve their own existence? I'm not saying it's right to enter into every conflict, but to live like this, to try to preserve life as normal in the midst of a war, I'm not sure that's right either. And this is what war does. It amplifies tendencies that are already present in the human heart. In some cases it brings out the best in people. In many cases it brings out the absolute worst. We see characters doubling down on their convictions, their impulses, and crossing lines in ways that they themselves might previously have deemed unthinkable. An obvious example is the extreme nationalist, played terrifyingly by Jesse Plemons. The two themes we've looked at so far, lenses and clothing, are brought together in his distinctive bright red sunglasses, which he wears as he oversees the piling of human corpses into a pit. Consider his perspective as he sees the world through those red lenses. For one thing, it means that for him, blood is less visible. And I think that reveals something about his character. Either he doesn't want to see blood, or he wants to see blood everywhere he looks. This is a man who has completely devalued human life. It takes a heroic act from Sammy to escape from his grasp, and it costs Sammy his life. So that Jesse Plemons character, is he just one bad apple? Well, the film confronts us with the reality that evil is much more pervasive than we tend to think. And we see that in the development of Jesse's character. Early in the film, Lee is angered by Jesse's presence on the trip.
You are angry with me.
There is no version of this that isn't a mistake. I know, because I'm it. Joe and Sammy are it.
It's my choice.
Right. And I'll remember that when you lose your shit, or you get blown up, or shot.
Even though this is Lee's job, and she shows no signs of stopping herself, she is pained by Jesse's desire to follow in her footsteps. There's an inkling of almost maternal protection. Jesse asks Lee a profound question. If Jesse dies, if it's her mangled body on the ground, would Lee take that photo? Lee replies, "What do you think?" Of course she would. That's the job, pointing the lens at the most tragic of subjects. And this conversation is paid off in the climax of the film, as we shall see. But Jesse becomes increasingly reckless. At one point they run into two reporter colleagues. Their cars are travelling side by side at high speed, and one of them, Tony, climbs from his car into the other whilst they're moving. Jessie is so captivated by the stunt that she has a go herself. She's turning into something of an adrenaline junkie. Now that's the characters messing around. We then have the encounter with the extremists. And even after that, Jessie says this.
I've never been scared like that before, and I've never felt more alive.
Fear can be a healthy thing, and there are definitely good ways to respond to it, but there's a perverse addictive quality to the way Jessie and others want to engage with it, a desire to keep pushing the envelope. In the final act, as the Western forces surge into Washington, D.C., Jessie takes ludicrous risks, stepping into the firing lines for the sake of her photographs. The soldiers are frequently grabbing her and pulling her back behind cover. At one point, Jessie and Joel make eye contact in the midst of the carnage, and they smile at each other. They're getting a kick out of this. Incidentally, they are the only two characters of the four who survive to the end of the film. The usually unruffleable Lee, on the other hand, reaches her breaking point. She leans against a wall, hands on her head, screaming. It all catches up with her. The death of Sammy, the cumulative weight of all the war zone horrors she's witnessed in her lifetime. It's too much. A fellow journalist makes a joke about racing Lee to be the one to capture the death of the president on camera. And as Lee regains her composure, she is the first person to realise that the president is still inside the White House. So at this point it's building and building with a nail-biting tension. On the one hand you have the war itself. If the Western forces take out the president, if they take out the head, they then have control of the country. And for the photographers, well, that would be the most iconic photo of the war, wouldn't it? To photograph the death of the president. Who will be the one to take that photo? And both these threads come to a head in the White House crossfire. Jessie steps into the middle of the corridor, the most vulnerable place, in order to take a photo. Lee rushes to save her, pushing Jessie down to the ground. Jessie whirls around, camera pointed up at Lee, ready to capture her mentor's death. Remember that Lee said she would photograph Jessie's death? Well, what ends up happening is the reverse. Bullets come thick and fast, and Lee crumples to the ground. Jessie gets up and barely looks back. There's an unstoppable inevitability to all this. The Western forces press on into the Oval Office and kill the president. Jessie presses on and captures the moment on camera. She is the one to take that photo. Maybe it was an elaborate, premeditated plan. Jessie knew that Lee would die trying to save her, so she stepped into the crossfire in order to bring about Lee's death. Lee wasn't just Jessie's mentor, she was Jessie's competitor. And with her gone, Jessie gets to be the one to take the most iconic photo of the war. You could speculate that, but I don't think that is what's going on. I don't know how conscious Jessie is of her actions in this final act. It all happens very quickly. It's not premeditated. The disturbing reality is that this is just what comes out of Jessie. Under the intense pressure, she does all these things instinctively. And that is a profoundly disturbing reflection of the human heart. This is what we are like. This is what humans do. We pursue our selfish ends, whatever the cost. The film isn't especially interested in politics. It's not about how the Civil War started. It's not about left and right. For the most part, the Civil War is the context, not the content of the film. I think it's really about the terrifying outworkings of the human heart and how they get amplified by war. Well, thanks so much for watching. Do let me know what you think in the comments. If you'd like to get early access to my videos, bonus content, and even contribute to the writing of these videos, as well as supporting the channel, go to patreon.com/Thomas Thorogood. Do subscribe if you'd like to stay in the loop, and I will see you soon.